Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this seminar that we are organizing this morning. We are extremely glad and honored to have with us here Professor Dan Isenberg. I will say a few words, I promise, Dan. Dan Isenberg holds a Ph.D. in social psychology from Harvard University. He's a professor of entrepreneurship practice at Babson College, one of the leading institutions in the United States for entrepreneurship education. He was the founding executive director of the Babson Entrepreneurship Ecosystem Project, an associate at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and an adjunct professor at Columbia Business School. Dan served as a professor at Harvard Business School from 1981 to 1987, and again from 2005 to 2009. In the intervening years, he was active as an entrepreneur and venture capitalist in Israel. Between 2009 and 2013, he worked closely with the World Economic Forum, organizing and leading forum events in Davos, as well as in Africa, Europe, and China. In 2012, Mikhail Gorbachev awarded him with the Pio Mansou Award for Innovations in Economic Development. Dan is the author of numerous scientific papers and books, including a book titled Worthless, Impossible, and Stupid: How Contrarian Entrepreneurs Create and Capture Extraordinary Value. In this book, he explores how successful entrepreneurs often pursue ideas that initially appear unrealistic or even foolish. Their success lies precisely in their ability to see value where conventional thinking cannot, by challenging assumptions, pursuing ideas others overlook, and persisting long enough for opportunities to emerge. A father of 5 and grandfather of 4, Dan also enjoys cooking, fishing, salsa dancing, and collecting wine. This morning, however, he sticks to his role as an educator to share with us some secrets of scale. Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, yes, you can hear me. I invite anyone to come down closer because I won't be offended if you have to leave. I know you're sitting back there to sort of hedge your bets, but it's not necessary. Because I want to make this as interactive as possible, I'm going to talk. As Panos introduced me, I have been, let's say, half of my professional career a professor, which means I can talk a long time about nothing. But if we make it interactive, I think it'll be more interesting for everybody. I do want to make this as practical as possible. How many of you, I assume most of you, but I just want to check, are scientists? Almost everybody. And how many of you have experience in some form or another working in or founding or involved in a company, let's say? Okay, so you can be my anchors in reality. I'm going to talk today. We had a little bit of a technical issue, so this is not my computer, and I hope that things will work. So we're going to talk today about some lessons learned from scalers who are also founders, but also my experience in funding scalers. One of my experiences is that I've invested, I signed my 112th direct investment earlier this week. I'm not particularly proud of that necessarily, but it's a fact. And if nothing else, I've learned a lot with, or at least learned a little with a lot of money, maybe a lot with a lot of money. And I'm a limited partner in 9 venture funds in different places around the world. And I also founded a company. I was a general partner in a venture capital fund. Actually, my academic career is long over. I taught my last academic class probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm in the real world. By the way, I do have a strong place in my heart for science. My father was a real hardcore scientist, I'm a social psychologist, trained as a social psychologist, as you heard. I call that voodoo science because I know what real science is. My father was a biophysicist, theoretical physicist turned biophysicist. My late wife was a neuroscientist, hardcore test tubes, chemicals and things like that. And I live in a little village that maybe some of you have heard of called Woods Hole, Massachusetts, where I grew up. Woods Hole is perhaps one of the most concentrated areas of certain kinds of biological science and ocean science as well in the world. So I love science, and anything that I say bad about science and scientists today should be in the context of that love, because I do have a lot of criticism about the way people who are highly trained go about trying to do something in the real world, such as create a business. This is the sort of things I want to cover, but again, I want you to interrupt me as much as you want and as often as you want and as quickly as you want. But I want to start off a little thought exercise together, and I want to call it a test. It's not really a test. This is what I call a tale of two people. And one of the people you may have heard of is named Dean Kamen. And Dean Kamen, this is a story that goes back a good 25 years, but Dean Kamen was very famous. He invented the Segway. But even before that, he had invented and brought to market a wheelchair that climbs stairs, a new dialysis machine, made a lot of money, etc. And around 1999, roughly, there was a buzz that this has been written about in books. There's a buzz that sort of went through Silicon Valley, even though Dean Kamen was located in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, my part of the world. There was a buzz went through Silicon Valley, and all these very famous people, Stephen Jobs and an investor, John Doerr, and Jeff Bezos, were talking about this amazing thing that was going to revolutionize human transportation and be bigger than the internet, et cetera. And that, of course, was Segway. Raised almost $200 million, spent a lot of money, but very quickly, Segway started to go badly, I should say. And the news started to turn negative. The positive buzz became a negative scream. And in fact, things went downhill very fast for Dean Kamen. And by 2006, he was kicked out of the company. They couldn't raise any more money when they needed a lot of money to bring this to market. The product really wasn't working very well. It was a niche product only used for the tourism industry, where you could see Segway trains going through places. I'm sure they were in Athens, and they were certainly in other cities where there's a lot of tourism. And then the company gets acquired. Ultimately, one of the people who bought it was an Irishman who literally ran it off a cliff. He was driving a Segway and he died, ironically, by falling off the cliff on his Segway. And he was the owner of the company. And you can imagine that created all kinds of problems. And that word, it's not a typo. It continued to sour, not to soar. It's working. Even I can figure that out. Thank you. Thank you very much. And ultimately, and now you know what's happened to the technology, because you see these little things that look very scary running around all over the place. People balancing. Show me the Chinese company bought Segway for a little bit of money, and then it took about 10 years for it to really become very popular. So that's the story of one man, Dean Kamen. And now I'll give you the story of another man who in the same year, and I happen to know Robert Westman pretty well, I'll explain why, but around the same year, Robert Westman began building companies as well. And in 1999, he bought into an existing company in Iceland, a small pharmaceutical generics company that was on the verge, literally, of going bankrupt. They had about 14 million euro in sales. He came in, took it over, mortgaged his house. He wasn't a wealthy guy, he was a middle-class guy, mortgaged his house, put every penny that he had into the company, raised money. And 8 years later, this little company of 99 people was a huge generics company of 11,000. In fact, it's now the second largest generics company. He's no longer there in the world, And you can see for yourselves. And what's interesting about, I need to get closer, I think, that the generics, I mean, you all use generic pharmaceuticals. We all do aspirin, Tylenol, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of them. The playbook for winning in the pharmaceutical industry, in the generics industry, is known. Everybody knows what it takes to win. There's no innovation at all in the strategy. There's no innovation at all in the product. In fact, if you innovate in a generic product, you can't sell it. If there's any innovation, it has to be exactly a copycat. That's by definition. If there's any variation at all, you can't sell it. If there's anything new in it, you can't sell it. So it's pure execution. It has nothing to do with what we're all involved with, innovation. And in 2008, he left activists. He began to build more generic pharmaceutical companies. I won't go into all the details. I've written 4 cases now on Robert, and we used to teach them. So the question that I have for you is, which one of these is the real entrepreneur? Think about it just for a minute. And I'll make it a little bit more difficult for you, because it can't be both. I know you want to say it's both, right? But it can't be both. And why? Because one of them starts up a company, the other one buys an existing company, buys into an existing company. One of them innovates, the other one copies. One of them invests his own money, and the other one raises money from others. He has, except for his mortgage, has no money to invest. One of them accepts failure. Take it from me that I know Robert very well. He does not fail, ever, at anything. He is going to win at everything that he does. He's a very nice guy, but he's a competitor. One of them misses the market. The other one hits the market. One of them misses the vision. The other one achieves it. One destroys wealth. The other one creates wealth. One executes poorly. The other one executes well. So it can't be both. Which is it? I'm asking you. Yes, go ahead. But do we have another microphone? What? The second Robert Westman. Robert is why? Was it now that begs the question, because he knows how entrepreneurship. You have a mic. We'll try to manage this together. That's one of the reasons I want everyone down here. So what does that mean? He knows how entrepreneurship works. That sort of begs the question: what's entrepreneurship? Oh, so it's about making a lot of money? Anybody else? We have one definition of entrepreneurship: it's making money. Over here.
I would say the first guy.
Why?
Because he doesn't have a clear vision, and he fails, and you learn from your failures, and you go on, and you change the vision, and you miss the market in the beginning, but then you can find where you should aim at.
So you think just
That's a business.
running a business? He's a businessman. Give him the mic. What's your name? Yanni? Give him the mic. Have him. You heard what he said, right? Why is he wrong? Give him the microphone. Oh, you got it. Okay.
He's done? Okay. So I didn't hear what he said.
Say it again. Give it a summary.
Okay, so for me, entrepreneurship is like you start and you are not exactly sure where you're going. You have a big vision, then you have to change the vision in order to fit the market. Then you might destroy wealth, or you might execute poorly in the beginning, but you learn, you adapt.
You may fail.
Yeah, you may fail.
And you learn from the failures. And why is that wrong?
He described research process.
Oh, so he's stuck.
If
He's
talking about, if
What's
we're
your
talking
name?
about researchers,
Huh? Manos is stuck in the laboratory and he has these sort of crazy ideas that entrepreneurship is. You go out and you try things, you fail, you win. Huh?
If we're talking about research, the first guy is clearly a researcher. If we're talking about creating wealth, the second guy is clearly the winner.
Why is he wrong?
I don't say he's wrong, but it's
Yes, you do.
yeah, okay.
You don't want to say it, but you're implying it. Because you have the exact opposite
Okay,
opinion.
this looks like a big company that knows how to play the game and you know how to invest, how to make money. But when you're an entrepreneur, you don't know all this stuff in the beginning, but you learn along the way.
So it's intrinsically uncertain. If it's not risky and uncertain, and then it's not entrepreneurship. Any other? Yes. You're going to explain how both of them are wrong.
So maybe another view would be no one is an entrepreneur because the first one didn't hit the market, he failed to see what the customers want, and the second one didn't innovate. He just copied. I missed the story for the second one, but I think...
Wait, so you're saying that if there's no innovation, there's no entrepreneurship?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Any other, what are we missing? Any other viewpoints here?
Well, the first one is primarily an inventor. He makes an invention. The second one is just an investor. So it needs to be a combination.
He's just an investor. And inventor versus investor. Okay. There's no really right answer, but I think as we, oh, yes.
Let's be honest here. You painted a picture.
Wait, you said, let's be honest?
Let's be honest.
Or you mean the people who have talked so far are not being honest? I just want to be clear. That's all. We're all friends.
So you painted a picture for the first guy. So perhaps he had one failure there, but it's likely that before that he had several successes.
He did. I said that.
So okay, an entrepreneur is willing to take some bets, perhaps. You know, not the attitude I never fail. But the attitude, okay, yeah, I failed there, but I succeeded elsewhere. You know what?
So when he succeeded, he was an entrepreneur. When he failed, he was a failed entrepreneur. He was a failed entrepreneur.
He's willing to bet.
Is the failure part of the entrepreneurship or not?
Exactly.
Should we celebrate failure?
It's part of the game.
Should we celebrate failure? Should we? It's part of the game. We want to play the game. That means it should be good, right? It's good to fail.
You learn from it.
Is it good to fail or not?
Because you learn, yeah, it can be.
Okay. I can't back you into a corner. You're a tough audience. Okay, let's go on. I'm not going to give the answer right now, but I'm going to tell you of a real conversation that I had a few weeks ago in Greece on the mainland in Athens. And it was a conversation that I had with I can't say who it is because it's a very prominent person who's been involved in supporting entrepreneurship, funding entrepreneurship, maybe hundreds, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of euro and many different activities and so on. And I was telling him about a startup that not a startup, a growing company. And sounds like it's not Epignosis. It's a company I'd met. And by the way, in Greece, I'm really surprised. There are a lot of companies that are growing, that are beyond the startup stage, and people don't know about them. They're sort of seem to be hidden somewhere. They're there, and if they know about them, they don't know much about them because they tend to keep things to themselves. I don't know if that's part of the culture. Anyway, I found one of them, and I interviewed the founder and the CEO. And they're doing 60 million roughly in euro. They're extremely profitable, growing about 30%, 35% a year for 10 years. I don't think did they raise capital or not? I don't think they raised only growth capital. They booted up and got going without. And I said, wow, isn't this interesting? Because I was telling this, and this person said, his response was, they're not a success. And I said, of course, well, why not? And his answer was, because they'll never have an exit. No one will ever acquire them. The owner wants to keep it to himself. And they didn't really raise a lot of money either. That was his answer. Now, we're going to talk about that in a little while. But that raises a good question about what is success. I started with the question, what's entrepreneurship? Now I'm going to ask you, what is success? Because we talked about success and failure. Somehow failure is part of the process of entrepreneurship. Some of you are saying. Some of you are saying that it's more important that it's the success that makes you an entrepreneur. What if you fail and you fail and you fail and you fail? Are you an entrepreneur if you fail and fail and fail and fail? For 20 years, 30 years, you keep failing? And don't answer the question. I'm just asking the questions. That's my job. So there's a company, I know this company. I have a podcast called Scalerator Podcasts. And this was the first guest on the podcast, Automute. They make panels to acoustify space. And they found themselves with about $7-8 million in revenues, but having trouble with profitability and a culture problem in the company. People weren't happy. And they tracked it down to one particular customer that was problematic. And the customer, you've probably never heard of them. They're a company called Amazon. And they were selling about 25% of their products to Amazon, but weren't getting paid on time. And they weren't making any money, any profit at all. And they made the tough decision to reduce their revenues from about 7 million to about 5 million by they fired Amazon. And they became profitable and happier as a company. So I'll just ask you, is that success? Don't answer it, because I'm going to give you a few examples. Here's another one, a company that I'm invested in also on my podcast called U&I. U&I has been a long trajectory. They raised a lot of money. Ultimately, today, what they do is they build websites with AI very fast, very cheaply. They manage the websites for you. So if you're a small business owner, you can get a website up and running right away. And they were doing about $5 to $6 million in recurring revenues. And they had about 400,000 or 500,000 customers, 80% of which were freemium customers. And at some point, they realized this is a big drag on their profitability, on their cash flows, on their morale, on the complexity of the operation. And they got rid of all of their free customers overnight. They reduced their business also from about 5, 6, 7 million a year to about 4 or 5. And they slowly built back up to about 10 million a year. And they're profitable. Is that success? Then I'll give you another example. This is a company, also a company that I'm invested in, called Camp. And they have experience stores, locations where you can go in with your kids, and you can bring your kids, and you can buy things, and they have fun, and they play games, and they're teachers, and they do all kinds of things. And they raised a few tens of millions of dollars. At some point, they ran out of money, and they refinanced their company with they were doing about $10 million in revenues. They refinanced their company at a valuation of $1 million. $1 million of value. Of course, I invested because it was a great opportunity. I invested again. But is that a success? To go from value of about 100 million to a value of 1 million. And now they have about $50 million in revenues in 12 stores throughout the United States, still not profitable. Is that success? And I'll give you another example. These are all companies that I know. Many of them I've invested in. I'm also invested in both of these companies. This is actually two companies. The one on the left is a company that used to be called Local Motors, and that sort of gives away part of the story. Used to be called Local Motors. Jay Rogers, my student, raised about $100 million over a period of years, brought the world's first 3D printed car to market, the Rally Fighter down there, completely 3D printed, sold about 150 of them, then decided that really wasn't a good business. And they began 3D printing small minibuses that were self-driving, autonomous minibuses for campuses. They drive around campuses and so on. Ran out of money, folded the company. All the assets were gotten rid of. All the investment, including mine, completely wiped out. And then about 2 years ago, he founded another company, and those are the 3 images on the right, and that's Jay in both cases, about 10 years older in the one up here than he was down here. And it's a company called Hattie, and they do 3D printing, same technology, more advanced materials, more advanced equipment to manufacture them. They have robots, and they're doing now roughly $5 million, doubling sales every quarter now. In some months, in fact, doubling their sales. And I asked Jay, what did you learn from the failure of Local Motors to make Hattie a success? By the way, Hattie, he decided to start only after he had a customer. He said one of the things he learned is that if you can get a paying customer before you start, you're in a very different position than if you have to raise tens of millions of dollars to build a product and then get a customer. And I asked him, Jay, this is on my podcast from about 2 weeks ago. I said, Jay, what did you learn from the failure of Local Motors to make Hattie a success? And they're almost break even, by the way. And he said, Local Motors was a failure if you look just at Local Motors as a discrete event. But if you look at it, at Local Motors and Hattie as interconnected, it's not a failure. It's a success because all of that money that was in Local Motors went to the success of Hattie. It's an interesting perspective because it's more of a societal perspective. The society benefits. It's also, by the way, it's fully circular economy. You recycle all the materials and so on and so forth. It's a great story. So how do we know if it's hard to define success? I think it is. Or let's put it this way. There are many different definitions of success. It could be success for society. It could be success for shareholders. It could be success for customers. It could be success for our bankers, for our employees. Sometimes, when we're lucky, all those different successes fit together, but more often than not, they don't. So how do we know when we're successful if there are many different definitions of success? So what we're going to do is a little bit of an experiment. Obviously, this is Claude. Well, actually, ChatGPT made this image. I didn't make this image. And I think you can recognize me. But we're going to have a conversation now with Claude. But it's a very special, we're going to try, very special conversation with Claude. Because what I did is I took these 34 interviews with scalers in all around the world, very different industries. Every one of them had at least $5 million in revenue, some of them 500 million. And so I have a database of all those transcripts and all those interviews. And we're going to work together with Claude to try and mine that database for insights about what's success and what's failure in real time. I don't know what they're going to say, but I'm going to ask you to help me ask the questions of Claude. Maybe I'll ask the first one just to get the ball rolling. Bear with me for a second here. This may be unique. So I've created this bracket. Is now it's on? Okay, good, thank you. I've created a script to help us ask questions of Claude together. You can see that? I'm just setting it up. So I gave it a choice. Do we want to hear the insights? Do we want to get quotes? Do we want to actually have the background? Let's just ask for the insights for now. So let's start with a question. And this is a question not of Claude going out into somewhere in cyberspace and trying to understand what entrepreneurs have done and not done, succeeded and failed. This is Claude going to my 34 experts, people who have done at least something. Some have done an awful lot in many different industries, many different environments, some heavy duty technology, some not at all technology. And I'm just going to start by asking one question, but then I'm going to ask you to ask some questions of Claude as well and see what Claude comes up with. And we don't have to agree with Claude, but we can see what these experts tell us. Can you see this? Can you see it? There's probably a way to make this bigger. Okay, this definition of success, let's see, who said that? Help me out. Let's come up with some other questions to ask. That wasn't a very good answer. I didn't like that. Let's say refine the answer. What is real success? What is failure? Can you read it? Or do you want me to read it to you? These aren't things you learn in laboratory. The single biggest mistake is keeping someone for too long. What that means is one of the keys to success is learning how to fire people, learning how to part ways with founders, learning how to part ways not just with customers, but learning how to part ways with employees, learn how to part ways with people who may have been part of your success early on, but can't be part of your success at a later stage. Come on. Questions? Yes.
What was the pivotal point?
Sorry?
What was the pivotal point for their success?
What was the what?
Pivotal.
Pivotal. What is the scaling takes off the moment, I will read it. I feel better reading it. Scaling takes off the moment someone other than the founder can sell the product. That's when you stop being a person with a business and become a business with a future. So I'm going to ask a follow-on question. Should the founder sell? I don't know the answer. Insight one. There are two insights here. Yes? And if you can't sell it yourself as the founder, I'm going to come back to this when we talk about sales. If you can't sell it yourself as a founder, then you don't have a company. And Insight 2, but it's only when someone else can sell. Sorry, it says, but only until someone else can sell, then get out fast, because get out of sales fast, because staying too long is its own kind of failure. Now, you can disagree, but this is an opinion, at least based on 34 data points, very rich data points. Other questions? Okay,
Can you ask?
go.
I think an interesting question for the audience here is whether.
Wait a second, Demetrius.
So I would like, I mean, let's ask a question about the roles of researchers as founders.
Let me ask, how important is technology? How about that?
Very good.
You may or may not like I may not like the answer. Technology is the enabler, not the answer. The founders who scaled fastest were the ones who stopped falling in love with their technology and started obsessing over the problem it solved. How many of you know Raspberry Pi? Oh, good. So the founder of Raspberry Pi was on my podcast. Oops, sorry. It says what scaled wasn't the chip. It was the obsession with the customer. By the way, it's very interesting. The Raspberry Pi example, they thought their customer was different from what it was. When they launched the product was for children, young people, to learn how to program. That was the purpose of the company, to put the power of the computer in the hands of young people, turn them into programmers, and change society on that basis. And what they found was that engineers were buying their product and using it to build prototypes, using it to run experiments, using it as a cheap way of hooking up peripherals. How many of you actually use Raspberry Pi? Yeah. I think it was very important in Yodec, right? Which I think it still is. Other questions? How about I'm going to ask, what was your biggest mistake? I hate it when it gets too small, too smart. Let me explain. Bjorn von Siemens, his last name is not a mistake. This is von Siemens of the Siemens family, a company that I know very well. His biggest mistake was to solve for the problem that the customer has, not the problem that you want to solve. One more? Anybody have a, come on. Yes. I'm not sure we'll get a good answer. Let's try. What is a good? That's what I'm going to ask it. You have to fall in love with your problem, not your technology or product. We heard that already once. Okay. We can, if you like, we can come back, but we can come back if you'd like. But these are the kinds of questions. By the way, if I ask Claude, what would you tell your younger self? The biggest surprise I got was the number of people who said, start earlier, don't wait till it's perfect, do it when you're young. And that really surprised me, because I think there's certain maturity that helps build a company where you really understand what you're trying to accomplish and you don't have all these myths in your head. But almost all of them said, I would start earlier and I wouldn't wait till it's perfect. So these kinds of discussions, as well as my own investments and the cases I've written, have led me to think about a few myths and a few mistakes. And I want to wrap up by giving a few of the myths about entrepreneurship, which I think might help some of you think about your own role and what you want to do with entrepreneurship. The first myth is that scale up requires venture capital. One of the things that a lot of people who are, especially people in technology intensive areas, think is if they don't have angel investing or early stage venture capital investing, they can't build a company. But if you look at the history, you see that there are huge numbers of companies that built themselves. And by the way, Epignosis and Yodec, which are where Dimitris Singos is here. I don't know if you all know him, but he founded at least two very, very important companies with no early stage capital at all, mostly bootstrapped, a little bit of money from home, so to speak. But those aren't even up here. There's some very significant companies that got going without raising capital. And I think the Jay Rogers discipline of don't raise capital till you have a customer, it's not possible in a lot of businesses, but it's a really good test that if you can't do it, then maybe you need to raise capital or maybe you need to find something else to do. It's a great discipline to force yourself to say, can I get someone to pay for this even before it's completed? Or can I complete a version of it to actually sell? And there's much too much emphasis in the way we educate entrepreneurs, in the way we coach entrepreneurs, and the way we think ourselves about entrepreneurship, much too much emphasis on trying to please the people with money so that they'll give us some. By the way, there's some very significant companies here. In the United States, for some reason, the entire electronic medical records industry, that's all the medical records that are online, all three major players were bootstrapped. Now, this may sound absurd, but I think it's useful to think about the possibility of growing companies regardless of how old they are. And I'll just give some examples here. These are entrepreneurs who didn't start companies. Starbucks, Howard Schultz, he did not start Starbucks. He bought it for $17 million. Robert Westman, as we already saw, bought into activists when it was a small company, very small. Pixar was spun out of another studio, Lucasfilms. I don't know if you know SodaStream. You press a button and you get soda coming out of it. I think it's sold also in Greece. But that was a company that we actually bought. We bought it out of bankruptcy, and it became a multi-billion-dollar company. Surprise, Tesla Motors wasn't a startup. Elon Musk didn't start Tesla Motors. He came in when another guy, Srish Dory, actually had started the company. He was an investor. Myth 3, if you're counting. You've all heard about unicorns. By the way, there was a unicorn, originally, the first use of the term was a venture capitalist in the West Coast about 15 years or so ago, went and did a study of privately held venture-backed enterprise software companies. That was the birth of the term unicorn. And she found out that there were certain characteristics of these companies that achieved a paper value of $1 billion. And that term has caught on, unfortunately, and has become a proxy for a growth or a successful company. First of all, there was a very interesting study done about 5 or 6 years ago by economists at University of Chicago, and they studied 135 unicorns they could get good information on, and they found out that, in fact, about 50% of them weren't, if you use proper valuation techniques. In other words, the $1 billion paper value disappeared when you looked at all the warrants and options and anti-dilution mechanisms and everything else. About 50% of them disappeared. Sobering. And I prefer the term workhorse, even though some workhorses may suddenly grow a horn in the middle of their heads and become unicorns. Workhorses is a much more realistic, in my own opinion and my own observation, a much more realistic way of thinking about businesses. And workhorses, they're out there, they're plowing the fields, they're not very glamorous. They have one characteristic that's really important compared to unicorns. You know what it is? They really exist. They're real, they're not mythical. Now, I've heard so many government officials use unicorn as a proxy for growth. Unicorns, by the way, are not famous for producing a lot of jobs. They're not famous for producing a whole lot except for wealth for a very limited number of shareholders. Doesn't make them wrong or immoral. It just doesn't mean that they should be the focus of our attention unless our only purpose is to make, and it's legitimate, to make a lot of money. By the way, there's something I call the law of 17s. Now, if you go to somebody and you say, I'm going to grow a business by 17% a year, they'll look at you and say, an investor will look at you and say, it's not, not very exciting. If you grow a business for 17 years at 17% a year, it's 17 times bigger. Approximately. It's not exact, but it's easy to remember. That's not so bad, even though 70% a year doesn't sound good to a venture capitalist. So another myth, that scale up is some set of stages that you go through. The empirical reality, and that it's linear. The empirical reality is this. Empirical reality. In other words, the fact is that if you look at how companies grow, they grow like this. They don't grow like this. I'll show you some examples. This is one of them. These curves, I don't know if you can see, this is 1982, and it goes up to about 2015, but it keeps going. The story is the same after 2015. This one curve is a curve of profit, and the other curve, a curve of revenues. Anybody know what company that is? Come on. I give you a hint. It's Apple. Apple, that great startup, all the value of Apple was created when it was 25 years old. All of it was created after Steve Jobs was gone for 12 years. And he was back for 7 years more before the value started taking off, before the revenues started taking off. Before that time, Apple was a niche player. Architects, designers, people in graphic arts, they were the ones who used Apple. It was a cult, not exactly computer. And it's way, way beyond start. I'll give you another example. This is 10 years. I just have market value here of the share price. This is a company for 10 years after. Any idea what this company is or was? This is harder. I'll put you out of your misery. By the way, you can see what happened after 2007 to this company. Revenues, cash flows, everything went up after 2007. It had been public for 10 years. This is another example of a non-technology company whose value was created when it was 80 years old, I think. I think it was about 80. Yeah, it was over 80 years old. This is Walt Disney Corporation. All the value created after the founder was long gone. Many generations of executives were gone. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs make, no matter how you define entrepreneur, whether it's someone who uses technology and takes risks and maybe fails, or whether it's someone who succeeds and makes money, is most of them don't really understand sales. Let's not forget that sale, S-A-L-E, is 80% of S-C-A-L-E. If you don't sell it, nothing happens. But a lot of us spend a lot of time on technology, a lot of time developing the product, a lot of time thinking about strategy, and not enough time and not early enough thinking about how do we actually sell it. In fact, sales has a little bit of a dirty name. Somebody will sell it. And if you talk to these 34 founders in my database, they'll all say how important it is, first of all, for the founder to be the key salesperson. You're always selling. You're selling your product, you're selling your company, you're selling to new employees, you're selling to your landlord, you're selling to investors, you're selling to bankers. Sales has got to become a good activity where you're actually delivering benefits. And that's another mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs make, is they don't really understand the benefits. They understand their product, they don't understand the benefits. I'll give you an example. I'm going to give you, it's a very off-color example. This is an adult audience. And I'm not going to give you this example to shock you. I'm going to give it to you because you will never, ever forget it. The person who sells you a condom 5 minutes before you need it is your best friend. The person who sells it to you 5 minutes after you need it is a pain in the ass. Now, what you're selling is, you're not selling a product. You're selling a benefit. Timing is part of the benefit. It's not just the product. You will never forget that example. That's why sales is so important. And when it works well, when you understand the benefit that you're selling. By the way, I could have used the example of selling a cold drink on the beach or selling an umbrella, but you would never remember those examples. It's delivering value when it's needed, in the way it's needed, in the way that it is understood as value for the customer. The product that you're selling, and again, here I won't go into too much detail, and I'm not the world's expert either, but the product, the physical characteristics, the technical characteristics of the product, that's not what your customer's buying. Your customer's buying something else. I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a company that Demetrius and I are invested in that it's called Push It, an Israeli company. They're doing about $1 million in revenues. They're taking off very nicely. And what they do is they have cameras going when you're playing paddleball or tennis or football in a small football field. And there's a button that says push it on it. And when something happens that you want to remember, somebody falls down or somebody makes a great move or something, you just go to the wall and you go like that, you push it, and it captures the last 30 seconds puts it on the website, does nice things with it, and so on and so forth. What are they selling? What are they selling? The benefit. What's the benefit that they're selling? A memory. What's the benefit that they're selling? She says memory. Fun, friendship, jokes, humor. Wrong. What they're selling is the ability of the owner of that tennis court to be able to attract customers. They're selling the ability of that owner to keep those customers, to have them stay longer, to buy drinks from the vending machine when they're thirsty because they're hanging around, to tell their friends, hey, reduces marketing costs, to tell their friends, hey, this is a great place to go play tennis or play paddleball or pickleball. That's what they're selling. And when I saw their video, I have a picture, I won't show it to you. I have a video of their homepage. We go to it, and it shows people having a great time playing paddleball and then going and hitting push it. But they don't show the owner of those three. By the way, there's some in Greece. They don't show the owner saying how proud they are, how easy it is for them to get new customers, how easy it is for get customers to renew their memberships and so on. Another mistake that I want to call your attention to, how are we doing for time, by the way? Are we okay? I don't see a clock here. 15 more minutes. I do want you to ask questions, and I'm happy if you disagree with me as well. But another big problem is giving things away for free. And it's become almost, what's the right word? Standard operating procedure, especially for software products, to have freemium versions of it. The problem with freemium products, one of the problems with freemium products, is that it's like a drug. It feels really good, but it makes you sick. Now, drugs can be very useful if they're used carefully in specific situations. They can be life-saving, they can be pain-reducing. But if you take them at the wrong time, in the wrong way, they make you sick. And freemium is like that. Freemium is useful if you really need a critical mass of users to generate information, and let's say, for example, a data moat. But it can also trick you, and more often than not, it tricks you into thinking that you are delivering value when you're not. Because someone who buys something has a very different set of considerations from someone who gets it for free to try it out. And that's, by the way, also similar for reference customers. A lot of us go to great effort to get the Amazon or get the whoever is the equivalent here in Greece that we think is going to be a signal that we have something of value. Yet that customer frequently doesn't pay on time, doesn't pay the full price, frequently demands what we call edge cases, frequently demands extra features. Now, that can be very useful, but like drugs, has to be used very carefully. So what I tell people is if you sell something for less than the full price, take that difference, let's call it 100,000 euro, take that 100,000 euro, go over to the marketing department or the person in charge of marketing and say, will you pay for this? Will you give me $100,000 for this marketing? That just makes you, it's like trying to sell something from day one, even before you have it. It enforces a discipline that is really important. Let's see. You can read for yourselves. I'll just give you one more. Cash flow. Now, I know many of you are in the situation where you only have one side of the cash flow, and that is cash out. You're not in the situation where you have cash in yet. But managing that process of cash flow, and I'm really surprised at how few entrepreneurs really do this. understanding how money flows in and out of your company, and more importantly, or no less importantly, cash flow is not about how much I bring in and how much I spend out. Cash flow is about when I bring that in and when I spend it out. And oftentimes that can be the difference between life and death. Because if you don't breathe for 5 minutes, again, this is something I hope you'll remember. If you don't breathe for 5 minutes, you're just as dead as if you don't breathe for 5 months. And managing that cash flow on a very finely grained basis and manipulating the timing of when the money comes in, getting someone to pay a little bit, even a day or two earlier, agreeing with your suppliers that maybe you'll pay them a day or two later. That discipline it actually saved our company 3 times. So with that, I'll end. We can have a conversation in the next 5 or 10 minutes. You can disagree. Yes. Yeah, but maybe get the microphone or you come closer.
Not knowing when to step down.
Yeah, or if to step down. Or if to step down. And
when implies if also, but yeah.
You know, one of the paradoxes is it's always better to leave when they want you to stay than to stay when they want you to leave. And we usually make the second mistake rather than the first. But the hard part of that is, how do you create a process by which you can get feedback as to whether it's the right decision or not? And that's where, for example, board of directors can be very helpful, and board of advisors. There's one company I know called Papaya Global. I don't know if you've run across them. They are now leading the world in terms of payment systems for employees. Yes? Right. That's because that's what I mean by board members. People who are on the board of directors who have a stake. Einat Gez is the founder of Papaya Global. It's about a $500 million revenue company worth many, many billions. And I wrote a case on her, and she founded the company with 2 other people whom she has fired. And she continually asks herself and her board, her investors, whether she should stay in her position. And saying when it's time for me to go, I need to go. And that's part of the way of building in that discipline of entertaining the possibility that I'm not the person to take this company to the next level. You know, there are a few really painful times or anxiety-producing times in an entrepreneur's life. I hate to be ending on this sort of depressing note, but there are a few very stressful times. One of the most stressful times is firing your partner, deciding with your partner. I'm talking about your business partner that it's not a good partnership anymore. There are mechanisms. I won't go into there are mechanisms for making that conversation easier, but that's certainly the stressful time. Second, very stressful time in that same area is firing people. Almost certainly, if you build a company, you will have to fire people. You can call it a different word if you want to, but you will have to fire people. And I tell people, you better get good at it. I had to fire people in my company. I can tell you the first time I did it, I postponed it forever. The second time I did it, I postponed it for forever, divided by 2. Eventually, I got to the point where if I went to sleep at night and realized that somebody wasn't appropriate, I'd have to have the conversation the next morning, right away. It's not easy to do. It's very stressful. Second, very stressful time is when you almost go bankrupt, and that will almost inevitably happen in your businesses. And the third time is when you raise prices. Now, that may surprise you, but one of the most important things that you can do is raise prices. And it's when you have a lot of fears that your customers will abandon you. And those are the 3 most stressful times in an entrepreneur's lives, in my opinion. Any other questions, comments? We have a few more minutes. Yes. Well, artificial intelligence is going to affect every single thing that we do, not just entrepreneurship. It's an incredible tool. We use it in many different ways. But I don't think it's going to change the nature of entrepreneurship at all. I'm too old. I've been through microprocessors. I've been through PCs. I've been through software. I've been through internet. And they all sound exactly the same. They're all a little different from each other. There's no doubt that life will be completely different as we work this. Well, we may never work it through. It'll continue to change and evolve, I think. But it won't change the process of entrepreneurship. It won't change the need to build a viable business. It won't change the need to learn how to sell or to understanding the benefits that you're delivering for your customers. By the way, I don't know if we've talked about this, but I think if I were younger, I would be now building a fund to buy undervalued assets that have been invested a lot in, because I think in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see a lot of companies that have had hundreds, maybe many billions of dollars invested that you can buy for a penny on the dollar or a penny on the euro. I think there's going to be tremendous value out there to buy for cheaply. So, and we saw that in software, and we saw that in PC, in almost every one of these 10-year technology cycles. Do you think it's going to change the process of entrepreneurship?
Do you believe that it's wise for the inventor or researcher to play also the role of the entrepreneur? I mean,
I don't think there's a generic answer to that question. I think the inventor will have to ask him or herself a lot of tough questions before deciding to be the business side of the entrepreneurial journey, because that's not what they know. It's not their strength. But I will say this, that in companies that are technology intensive, the inventor or the chief technologists, it may not be the inventor, but the people who are heavy into the technology have to be involved in selling in technology intensive companies. And if they don't know how to sell, you need to bring in a technologist who knows how to sell. That doesn't mean necessarily closing the sale, but it means how to actually proselytize, to champion, to talk to the customer's needs. Why is this important for you? I think with that, we will end. Thank you very much. I hope this has been useful, maybe interesting.